You ever hear a story that starts with a bang and ends with a whole city cheering? Sit tight, because this one's gonna take you from the rubble of Tel Aviv to the heart of Atlanta, with a guy who built more than just bridges, he built respect. Picture June 2025, Tel Aviv, a city still coughing up dust from the Iran-Israel war. The streets are a mess, crumbled buildings, twisted rebar, the kind of chaos that makes your heart ache. But there's this guy, Jamal Wright, a 32-year-old black engineer from Atlanta, standing in the middle of it, his work boots crunching glass, his hard hat tilted just so. His dark eyes scan blueprints under a scorching sun, his dreads tucked into a bandana, his denim jacket patched from years on construction sites. Jamal's a volunteer with Engineers Without Borders, here to rebuild a UN base shattered by missile strikes, but his team, mostly white, mostly skeptical, ain't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Flashback a week, Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Jamal's packing his bag, his mom's voice on the phone, thick with worry. "You sure about this, baby?" she asks, her southern drawl heavy. Jamal grins, his voice warm. "Ma, I've built schools in Haiti, clinics in Ghana. I got this." He's no stranger to tough jobs, MIT grad, started his own firm, Right Tech, designing sustainable systems for low-income communities. But Tel Aviv's different. The war's left scars deeper than concrete, and Jamal's here to fix what he can, armed with blueprints and a stubborn streak. Cut to now, the UN base, a skeleton of steel and ash, generators humming, volunteers shouting over the clatter of cranes. Jamal's sketching a power grid fix, his pencil flying, but his team, led by Greg Carson, a cocky Canadian engineer with a buzz cut and a superiority complex, is giving him the cold shoulder. Greg's crew, Jake from Texas, Sophie from Germany, whisper behind his back, their glances sharp. "He's just here for the optics," Greg mutters, loud enough for Jamal to hear, his voice dripping with disdain. "No way he's got the chops for this." Jake snickers, tossing a wrench between his hands, while Sophie rolls her eyes, her voice low. "Probably some diversity hire." Jamal's jaw tightens, his pencil pausing, but he keeps sketching, his Atlanta grid a shield. He's faced this before, boardrooms, job sites, professors who doubted his math, but here, in a war zone, it cuts deeper. The base's power grid is fried, the team's behind schedule, and Greg's crew treats him like an intern, forgetting to share plans, leaving him out of briefings. UN coordinator Lena Patel, a no-nonsense Indian woman, notices, her clipboard a constant, her voice sharp. "Carson, get right in the loop," she snaps, her eyes flicking to Jamal, a nod of respect he catches but doesn't linger on. A volunteer, Miriam, a local Israeli electrician, works nearby, her hands deft with wiring, her Hebrew accent warm as she hands Jamal a tool. "You know your stuff," she says, her eyes on his blueprints, ignoring Greg's glare. Jamal nods, his voice low, "Thanks, Miriam. Just trying to keep the lights on." But Greg's voice cuts through, loud, deliberate. "Right, you sure you're up for this?" He calls, his smirk sharp, his wrench twirling. "This ain't Atlanta. Don't mess up our grid." The team laughs, but Lena's eyes narrow, Miriam's hands pause, and Jamal's pencil keeps moving, his calm a storm brewing, his blueprints a truth Greg's about to learn the hard way. Alright, let's dive back into the dust-choked chaos of Tel Aviv's UN base, where the June 2025 night hums with the grind of cranes and the ghost of the Iran-Israel war's devastation, missile strikes and nuclear fallout that left the city in pieces. The air's thick with diesel and ash, floodlights casting jagged shadows over rubble and twisted steel. Jamal Wright, a 32-year-old black engineer from Atlanta, stands in the heart of it, his work boots crunching glass, his hard hat tilted, his denim jacket patched but proud. His dreads are tucked into a bandana, his dark eyes scanning blueprints for a power grid fix, his pencil a blur despite the heat. He's a volunteer with Engineers Without Borders, here to rebuild a shattered base, but his team, led by Greg Carson, a smug Canadian engineer with a buzz cut, treats him like an outsider, their whispers sharp. He's just here for the optics. Greg's crew, Jake from Texas, Sophie from Germany, snicker, their doubt a constant jab, but Jamal's Atlanta grit keeps him steady. His latest clash with Greg, who taunted, "Don't mess up our grid," still stings, but UN coordinator Lena Patel and local electrician Miriam have his back, their nods a quiet alliance. The cranes groan, the night presses in, and Jamal's blueprints are about to turn this base, and Greg's world, upside down. Flashback to Atlanta, a month ago, Jamal's cramped office at Right Tech, his startup for sustainable systems. He's pitching to investors, his voice steady, his slides sharp, showing a solar grid for rural clinics. "This is for communities like mine," he says, his dread swaying, his eyes bright. The investors, mostly white, mostly skeptical, nod, but one mutters, "Ambitious for a small outfit." Jamal lands the funding, but the doubt lingers, a fuel he carries to Tel Aviv, where Greg's crew echoes that same skepticism. Back in the now, the UN base is a pressure cooker, the generators hum faltering as the grid teeters. Jamal kneels by a fried transformer, his flashlight sweeping wires, his blueprints spread on a crate. Greg looms nearby, his wrench twirling, his voice a jab. "Right, you're holding us up," he says, his buzz cut glinting under floodlights, his smirk sharp. "This ain't your college project. Step aside if you can't hack it." Jake chuckles, tossing a cable, his Texas drawl thick. "Yeah, man, don't fry the whole base." Sophie, wiring a panel, rolls her eyes, her German accent clipped. "He's not ready for this." The team's laughs cut through the night, but Jamal's pencil doesn't waver, his voice low, steady. "I'm ready, Greg. Check the math." Lena Patel, clipboard in hand, steps in, her voice sharp, her Indian accent firm. "Carson, enough," she snaps, her eyes flicking to Jamal's blueprints. "Wright's plan is solid. Follow it." Greg's smirk falters, his wrench stilling, but he mutters, "We'll see." Miriam, soldering nearby, hands Jamal a tool, her Hebrew accent warm. "You've got this," she whispers, her eyes on Greg, a quiet defiance. Jamal nods, his hands tracing wires, his mind mapping a fix to power the base's lights, radios, medical tents, a lifeline for a city in ruins. A shout pierces the night, a generator sparking, flames licking its casing, the base's power flickering. Volunteers scramble, their voices frantic, the floodlights dimming. Greg freezes, his wrench clattering, his voice a bark. "It's gonna blow." Jake panics, his cable dropping, while Sophie backs away, her tools forgotten. Jamal's heart races, his training, MIT, Haiti rebuilds, kicking in. "Stay calm." He yells, grabbing his blueprints, his voice a command. "Cut the main breaker, redirect the load." He sprints to the generator, his boots crunching, his hands steady despite the sparks. Greg's face pales, his voice a stammer. "Right, you'll kill us." But Lena's eyes lock on Jamal, her voice firm. "Do it, right." Jamal dives into the wiring, his flashlight clenched in his teeth, his hands rerouting circuits, his blueprints a guide. Miriam follows, her soldering iron ready, her voice steady. "Tell me where," she says, her hands moving with his. Jake hesitates, his drawl shaky. He's nuts. But Sophie, seeing Jamal's focus, grabs a breaker switch, her voice clipped. He knows what he's doing. Greg stands frozen, his smirk gone, his hands useless as Jamal's plan unfolds. The sparks slow, the generator stabilizes, the floodlights steady, and the base's hum returns, radios crackling back to life. Lena claps Jamal's shoulder, her clipboard raised, her voice a roar. You saved the base, right? Volunteers cheer, their shouts echoing over the rubble, Miriam's smile wide, Sophie's nod reluctant but real. Jake's jaw drops, his drawl soft. Damn, man, you did that. Greg's face is ashen, his wrench limp, his voice a mutter. I didn't think. Jamal stands, his blueprints in hand, his denim jacket torn, his eyes on Greg. You didn't think I could, he says, his voice steady, a quiet fire. That's your problem, not mine. Flash forward, Atlanta, 2 weeks later. Jamal's at a community center, his blueprints framed, his voice carrying to a packed room. Tel Aviv taught me, he says, his dreads loose, his eyes bright, you don't just rebuild grids, you rebuild trust. The crowd, engineers, neighbors, kids, listens, rapt, his story spreading through churches, barbershops, and schools, a testament to a black engineer who turned bias into power. Let's jump back into the heart of Tel Aviv's shattered UN base, where the June 2025 night pulses with the grind of cranes and the weight of a city rebuilding from the Iran-Israel war's devastation, missile strikes and nuclear fallout that left scars in concrete and souls. The air's gritty with dust, floodlights flickering over rubble and twisted steel, the hum of generators a fragile lifeline. Jamal Wright, a 32-year-old black engineer from Atlanta, stands at the center of it, his work boots crunching glass, his hard hat tilted, his denim jacket torn but his spirit unbroken. His dreads are tucked into a bandana, his dark eyes scanning blueprints that just saved the base's power grid from a sparking generator, silencing the taunts of Greg Carson, a smug Canadian engineer with a buzz cut and a bruised ego. Greg's crew, Jake from Texas, Sophie from Germany, stand stunned, their smirks gone, while UN coordinator Lena Patel claps Jamal's shoulder, her voice a roar, you saved the base, right? Miriam, the local Israeli electrician, beams, her soldering iron still warm, and volunteers cheer, their shouts echoing over the ruins. Greg's silence is deafening, his wrench limp, his bias exposed, but Jamal's blueprints are a truth that's about to reshape more than just circuits. Flash forward, then back, because this story weaves through time like a good jazz riff, and the real crescendo's coming. Rewind to Atlanta, 3 months ago, Jamal's mom's kitchen, the smell of collards and cornbread thick in the air. He's sketching a solar grid on a napkin, his voice animated, telling his sister, Keisha, about his Tel Aviv mission. I'm gonna build something real, he says, his dreads swaying, his eyes bright. Keisha, a nurse, laughs, her voice teasing. You and your blueprints, always saving the world. But her eyes are proud, knowing Jamal's fought doubters since MIT, his blackness a hurdle he's turned into a ladder. That napkin sketch, now crumpled in his pocket, is the seed of the grid that just saved the day. Back in Tel Aviv, the floodlights hold steady, the base's radios crackling back to life, thanks to Jamal's quick thinking. Lena Patel, her clipboard raised, turns to the team, her Indian accent sharp, her voice a command. Wright's plan is the standard now, she says, her eyes sweeping from Jamal to Greg, who's slumped against a crate, his buzz cut dull under the lights, his face pale. Anyone disagree, step up. Jake, his Texas drawl quiet, shakes his head, his voice low. Man's a genius. Sophie, her German accent clipped, nods, her tools still, her earlier eye roll replaced by respect. He knew exactly what to do, she says, her voice soft, a convert. Miriam, wiring a panel, grins, her Hebrew accent warm. Told you he's the real deal, she says, her soldering iron a salute. Greg's hands clench his wrench, his voice a mutter, barely audible. It was a fluke, he says, his eyes on the ground, his ego a crumbling wall. But the team's energy has shifted, volunteers clustering around Jamal, their questions eager, how'd you reroute that? Can you teach us? Their respect a tide he feels but doesn't bask in. Jamal folds his blueprints, his voice steady, addressing Greg directly. It wasn't luck, Carson, he says, his Atlanta grit a quiet fire. It's math, work, and knowing what I'm doing. You should try it. The team laughs, a sharp burst that cuts through the night, Greg's face reddening, his wrench dropping with a clank. Lena steps in, her clipboard a gavel, her voice firm. Right, you're lead engineer on the next phase, she says, her eyes on the team, daring dissent. We're rebuilding the comms tower tomorrow. Your plan's the blueprint. Jamal nods, his hard hat tilting, his voice calm. Got it, ma'am. But his heart races, the weight of the role sinking in, a black engineer from Atlanta, leading a global team in a war zone, against every whisper that said he didn't belong. Greg's eyes narrow, his voice a hiss. You're giving him the tower. But Lena's glare silences him, her voice cutting. He earned it, Carson. You didn't. The night deepens, the rubble a silent witness, but a new shout breaks the hum, a crackle from the comms tower, its antenna sparking, threatening to cut off the base's link to rescue ops. Volunteers panic, their voices rising, the floodlights flickering again. Greg lunges for a toolkit, his voice a bark. I'll handle it. But his hands fumble, his earlier failure a shadow, his confidence gone. Jamal steps forward, his blueprints unrolled, his voice a command. Hold up, Greg, he says, his eyes scanning the tower's base, his mind racing. We need a bypass, not a patch. Follow my lead. Miriam grabs her tools, her voice steady. Tell me where, Jamal. Sophie, now on board, nods, her voice firm. I'm in. Jake, his drawl soft, grabs a cable, his voice earnest. Let's do this, man. Jamal directs the team, his flashlight sweeping the tower's wiring, his blueprints a map through the chaos. Reroute the signal through the secondary line, he says, his hands steady, his voice a lifeline. Miriam solders, Sophie switches breakers, Jake hauls cables, their teamwork a rhythm Jamal conducts. Greg, sidelined, watches, his wrench useless, his face a mix of shame and awe. The sparks slow, the antenna hums, the radios crackle back to life, and the team cheers, their shouts echoing over the rubble. Lena's voice booms, her clipboard raised. Right, you've done it again. Volunteers clap, Miriam's grin wide, Sophie's nod firm, Jake's voice loud. Hell yeah, man. Flash forward, Atlanta, a month later, a community center packed with engineers and locals. Jamal's on stage, his blueprints projected, his voice carrying. Tel Aviv wasn't just about wires, he says, his dreads loose, his denim jacket retired for a blazer. It was about proving we belong, no matter who doubts us. The crowd roars, their applause a wave, his story already spreading, churches, barbershops, schools, carried by voices, not screens. Have you ever seen someone shut down hate with pure skill? Share your story in the comments, I'm reading every one. Alright, let's dive back into the heart of Tel Aviv's battered UN base, where the June 2025 night crackles with the hum of generators and the weight of a city piecing itself back together after the Iran-Israel war's brutal toll, missile barrages and nuclear fallout that left streets in ruins. Floodlights cast stark shadows over rubble and twisted steel, the air thick with diesel and dust, the distant growl of bulldozers a grim soundtrack. Jamal Wright, a 32-year-old black engineer from Atlanta, stands tall, his work boots crunching glass, his hard hat tilted, his denim jacket torn from hours of relentless work. His dreads are tucked into a bandana, his dark eyes steady as he clutches blueprints that just saved the base's comms tower from sparking chaos, restoring radios critical for rescue ops. His team, once skeptical, led by Greg Carson, a smug Canadian engineer with a buzz cut, stands in awe, their taunts silenced by Jamal's skill. Greg's crew, Jake from Texas, Sophie from Germany, now follow his lead, while UN coordinator Lena Patel's praise, "Right, you've done it again," echoes over the cheers of volunteers. Miriam, the Israeli electrician, grins, her soldering iron a badge of alliance, but Greg's silence, his wrench limp, speaks loudest, his bias crumbling under Jamal's undeniable competence. Flash forward, then back, because this story's a weave of grit and glory, and Jamal's about to cement his legacy in Tel Aviv's ruins. The base's floodlights hold steady, the radios crackling with updates, a lifeline restored by Jamal's blueprints. Volunteers cluster around him, their questions eager. "How'd you bypass the surge? Can you show us the grid?" Their respect at tide washing away Greg's earlier jabs. Jamal folds his blueprints, his voice calm but commanding, his Atlanta drawl a quiet fire. "It's just math and focus," he says, his eyes sweeping the team, landing on Greg, who's slumped against a crate, his buzz cut dull, his face a mix of shame and defeat. "Anyone can learn it, if they're willing." Jake, his Texas drawl soft, nods, his cable coil forgotten. "Man, you're a wizard," he says, his earlier snicker a memory. Sophie, her German accent clipped but warm, adjusts her tools, her voice earnest. "You saved us, Jamal. I was wrong." Miriam, wiring a panel nearby, laughs, her Hebrew accent bright. "Told you he's the best," she says, her soldering iron a salute. Lena Patel, clipboard raised, steps forward, her Indian accent sharp, her eyes blazing with authority. "Right, your lead engineer for the base rebuild," she declares, her voice carrying over the rubble. "Power grid, comms, water systems, you're running the show." Greg's head snaps up, his wrench clattering, his voice a hoarse protest. "Him. He's," but Lena's glare cuts him off, her voice a blade. "He's earned it, Carson. You haven't. Step up or step out." The team murmurs, volunteers nodding, their cheers a wave, Greg's face reddening, his ego a pile of rubble. Jamal nods, his hard hat steady, his voice low. "I'm ready, ma'am," he says, his blueprints a map to more than circuits, a path to proving his worth. Flash back to Atlanta, 6 months ago, Jamal's right tech office, a cluttered room of laptops and coffee cups. He's sketching a water system for a Gunna village, his sister Keisha leaning over, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled, her voice teasing. "You're gonna save the world with that pencil," she says, her laugh warm. Jamal grins, his dreads loose, his eyes bright. "One grid at a time," he says, his napkin sketch a seed for Tel Aviv's triumph. That moment, that drive, fuels him now, as he faces a new crisis. Back in Tel Aviv, a shout pierces the night, a water main rupture, flooding the base's medical tents, threatening critical supplies. Volunteers panic, their voices rising, the floodlights flickering as water surges. Greg lunges for a valve, his voice a bark. "I've got this." But his hands fumble, his earlier failure a shadow, his wrench slipping in the mud. Jamal steps in, his blueprints unrolled, his voice a command. "Greg, hold off," he says, his eyes scanning the pipes, his mind racing. "We need to reroute, not shut it down." He points to a secondary line, his flashlight sweeping, his plan clear. Miriam grabs a wrench, her voice steady. "Show me, Jamal." Sophie and Jake follow, their tools ready, their earlier doubts gone. "You're calling it," Sophie says, her nod firm. Jake's drawl is eager. "Lead on, man." Jamal directs the team, his boots sloshing, his hands steady as he traces the main, his blueprints a lifeline. "Divert the flow here," he says, his voice cutting through the chaos, his flashlight guiding Miriam's wrench. Sophie adjusts a valve, Jake hauls pipes, their teamwork a rhythm Jamal conducts. Greg, sidelined, watches, his wrench useless, his face a storm of shame and awe. The water slows, the tent safe, the supplies secure, and the team cheers, their shouts echoing over the rubble. Lena's voice booms, her clipboard raised. "Right, you're a damn miracle." Volunteers clap, Miriam's grin wide, Sophie's tools down, Jake's voice loud. "Hell yeah, Jamal." Lena pulls Jamal aside, her clipboard a testament, her voice firm. "You're getting a UN citation for this," she says, her eyes shining. "The base stands because of you." Jamal nods, his denim jacket torn, his voice steady. "It's for the city, not me," he says, his eyes on the rubble, his heart on Atlanta's lessons. Greg's silence is heavy, his bias exposed, his team's respect now Jamal's. Flash forward, Atlanta, a month later, a tech conference packed with engineers. Jamal's on stage, his blueprints projected, his voice a call. "Tel Aviv showed me," he says, his blazer sharp, his dreads loose, "you don't just build systems, you build trust." The crowd roars, his story spreading, churches, schools, barbershops, a black engineer's truth rewriting the narrative. Alright, let's wrap this electrifying tale in Tel Aviv's war-torn UN base, where the June 2025 night fades, but the impact of Jamal Wright's heroics burns bright. The rubble still smolders from the Iran-Israel conflict, missile strikes and nuclear fallout, but Jamal, a 32-year-old black engineer from Atlanta, has turned chaos into triumph. His work boots are caked with dust, his denim jacket torn, his dreads tucked into a bandana, but his dark eyes glow with resolve as his blueprints saved the base's power grid and water system, silencing the taunts of Greg Carson, a smug Canadian engineer now humbled. Greg's crew, Jake from Texas, Sophie from Germany, cheer alongside volunteers, their earlier doubts buried under Jamal's skill. UN Coordinator Lena Patel's praise, "Right, you're a damn miracle." Echoes, and Miriam, the Israeli electrician, grins, her soldering iron a salute. Greg's silence, his wrench limp, speaks volumes, his bias a pile of rubble. This story's been weaving through time, flashing between Tel Aviv's ruins and Atlanta's hopes, and now it's time for the final act, a crescendo of community, truth, and a black engineer's legacy that'll light up more than a base. Back at the UN base, the floodlights hold strong, the radios hum, and the medical tents stand dry, thanks to Jamal's quick thinking. Volunteers swarm him, their questions a chorus: "How do you reroute that main? Can you teach us the grid?" Their respect a wave washing over Greg's faded smirks. Jamal tucks his blueprints under his arm, his voice steady, his Atlanta drawl a warm anchor. "It's about seeing the problem clear," he says, his hard hat tilted, his eyes sweeping the team, lingering on Greg, who's slumped by a crate, his buzz cut dull, his face etched with shame. "Math don't care who's holding the pencil." Jake, his Texas drawl thick with awe, claps Jamal's shoulder. "Man, you're a legend." Sophie, her German accent soft, nods, her tools still. "I underestimated you, Jamal. Won't happen again." Miriam, wiring a new panel, laughs, her Hebrew accent bright. "Told y'all he's the one." Lena Patel, clipboard in hand, steps forward, her Indian accent sharp, her eyes blazing with pride. "Right, the UN's awarding you the Volunteer Service Citation," she declares, holding up a formal letter, its seal glinting under the floodlights. "Your grids kept this base alive, power, comms, water. You're why we're standing." The volunteers erupt, their cheers echoing over the rubble, a crane operator raising a fist, a medic shouting, "Wright's the man." Greg's face twitches, his wrench forgotten, his voice a mutter. "Didn't see that coming," he says, his eyes on the ground, his ego a ghost. Jamal nods, his denim jacket patched but proud, his voice low. "It's for Tel Aviv, not me," he says, his heart flashing back to Atlanta's lessons, his mom's kitchen, Keisha's teasing, a napkin sketch that became a lifeline. Flash forward to Atlanta, 2 months later, a community center packed to the rafters, engineers, neighbors, and kids crammed in, their eyes on Jamal. He's on stage, his blazer sharp, his dreads loose, his blueprints projected behind him, a glowing map of wires and hope. Tel Aviv wasn't just about fixing grids, he says, his voice a steady rhythm, like a preacher at a revival. It was about proving we belong, no matter who says we don't. The crowd roars, their applause a wave, his sister Keisha in the front row, her nurse's scrub swapped for a dress, her eyes shining. "That's my brother," she whispers, her phone down, her heart full. The story's already spreading, not on social media, but through Atlanta's soul, churches where pastors preach Jamal's grit, barbershops where clippers pause to recount his stand, schools where kids sketch their own blueprints, inspired by a black engineer who rebuilt a city. Greg's reckoning is quiet but heavy. Lena's citation comes with a review, stripping him of leadership, reassigning him to grunt work in a distant camp, his buzz cut bowed under the weight of his bias. He writes Jamal a letter, his handwriting uneven, read at a UN debrief, admitting his prejudice, his shame a lesson for the team. Jake and Sophie, transformed, join a diversity task force, their tools now symbols of unity, their voices echoing Jamal's call for inclusion. Miriam, back in Tel Aviv, trains local engineers, her soldering iron a tribute to Jamal, her story of his heroics told at synagogues, a spark for Israel's rebuild. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution runs a feature, Black Engineers Triumph in Tel Aviv's Ruins, with photos of Jamal's blueprints, his citation, and Tel Aviv's restored base, quoted in Engineering Today. Community centers host Right's Way workshops, teaching kids to design grids, funded by Right Tech's new grants, sparked by the article. Lena, now a UN advisor, nominates Jamal for a Global Engineering Award, her clipboard a testament to his impact. Keisha's hospital adopts his solar grid for its ER, a nod to her brother's dream. Jamal returns to Atlanta, his blueprints a legacy, his work boots retired but his fire alive. He coaches kids at a STEM camp, his voice a guide, build your dreams, no matter who doubts you. Tel Aviv's base stands strong, its lights a beacon, its story carried by voices, pastors, barbers, teachers, not screens. This wasn't just a rebuild, it was a revolution, a black engineer's truth reshaping a city, a world. So, what's your story? Have you faced doubters and built something unstoppable? Drop it in the comments, I'm reading every one. If Jamal's fire lit you up, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Let's keep building a world where every blueprint shines, and no one's counted out.